Master House on fire, so they protected Master House. They didn't see themselves through conditioning. But that did not mean that our codes didn't survive, that our voodoo didn't survive. Henry T. Burleigh said, and listen to how he said it, they, meaning the spirituals, are never composed, but spring into life ready-made from the white heat of religious fervor during some protracted meeting in camp or church, as the simple, ecstatic utterance of wholly untutored minds, and are practically the only music in America which meets the scientific definition of a folk song. This is the words of Henry T. Burleigh. Ecstatic utterances of wholly untutored minds, he said. Uncomposed, he said, without pre-thought, without predetermination. And we know that now not to be true. Spirituals are generally classified by scholars into three categories: call and response. The leader, the preacher, sings a main verse, and the congregation responds with another verse. Examples of such spirituals include Swing Low, Swing Chariot, Ain't That Good News, Go Down Moses, all which we've later determined to be highly, deeply coded songs about escape and freedom. Burleigh, Harry T. Burleigh, his book is The Spirituals of Harry T. Burleigh, written or published by Berwin in New York City in 1984. That's where that bit of information was pulled from. Three categories are also mentioned in many locations in doing your research, but one in particular is www.negrospiritual.com. And the call and response musical form was appropriate for sending news and updated information in the struggle towards emancipation. Codes. Slaves also sang such call and response songs at work, which allowed them to send out messages during work time without the slaveholders coming to realization of their motivation and their intention. Another category was slow, sustained melodies. These songs usually express deep suffering and endurance. Such examples of these songs were The Poor Moaner, Deep River, There Is a Balm in Gilead. We also had rhythmic, syncopated, and segmented melodies. And remember now, drum patterns were feared, but we managed rhythmic, syncopated, segmented melodies in place of the absence of drum. These spirituals are usually sung by a group, not by a soloist. And the rhythm is based on the swinging movement of the head and the body. Examples of such spirituals include Elijah Rock, Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. Every time I feel the Spirit. Many of these songs hold alternative coded meanings for the slave. Through the songs, they express the desire for freedom at home while releasing the emotional tension buildup in the current struggle. They reflected upon their external condition, communicated with God and spirits and the ancestors, and also among themselves through the spirituals. Like many songs from the African homeland, spirituals are loaded with symbolism, metaphor, underlying meaning. There have been claims of encoded messages and spirituals made by scholars, but the evidence is often disputed, and the claims have been challenged by other spectrums. The object of this discussion is to press historical background about African American spirituals and their direct connection not only to encoded messages they're being used as coded songs for the Underground Railroad, but also for maintaining aspects of our traditional spirituality and religion, which we now umbrella under ATR, within the body of these works. The first African slaves were brought to North American colony of Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 to aid in the production of lucrative crops such as cotton and tobacco. I grew up, went to elementary school, junior high school, many of you know, in Prince George County, Maryland. My mother is a retired educator from Anne Arundel County, Maryland. And we drove through, passed through, discussed through these cotton and tobacco fields almost every day. And aboard the ships, the African slaves were either allowed or compelled to sing and dance so that they might stay strong and fit. I'm sure the white men thought they were better motivated, but they also, as we've seen demonstrated in commercial movies, Amistad, for instance, the usage of these songs to trick the slavers to communicate messages among themselves and even in the presence of these slavers. And although different tribes and clans and families sang in their own language, they were all united by fear and sorrow and the plight that we found ourselves in. Part of the African music tradition was the use of drums. It was a drum that particularly allowed the slaves to code messages from one plantation to another. However, once the slaveholders came to this realization, drums were banned. In fact, there were times when they denied us the right to music altogether. Not only church and reading the Bible, but singing hymns, singing songs, producing any form of music whatsoever, based on who your master was, where your plantation was, how isolated was your plantation from the greater community, if you will. Here, the greater community allowed a practice of us going and meeting at Congo Square on Sunday. That wasn't universally allowed throughout the enslaved world. And it was not until the first Great Awakening, which began around 1740, that slaves and their descendants were rigorously converted to Christianity, the religion of the slaveholders. Most of them embraced the new faith, at least on the surface, as a way to deal with their oppression, as a way to stay alive. The first spirituals were influenced by African music and Christian hymns. Some of these spirituals, known as ring shouts, were accompanied by dancing, hand clapping, foot stomping. The shout is not just sung, it is danced, and danced with the entire body. The dancers always move counterclockwise in a circle. And during the shout, the dancers and singers always sing a song that takes a call and response form with numerous repetitions that foreground the cooperative nature of the singing. Passages favor rhythm over melody in a way that emphasizes the collaborative nature of the event. And the worship continues for a long period and escalates in intensity, very much like a voodoo ceremony, very much like the ritual practices of the Sufi whirling dervishes, where each round goes higher and higher. The vibration is enhanced and elevated and lifted, and spirit and doors are opened up. As this intensity mounts, the shouters feel the presence of the spirit in their midst. And we can, these understanding this comprehension in Christian energy and symbolism, if that's where you are. But if you are feeling and united with your ancestors, then you know that there was a whole nother thing going on. And we are in a battle in modern times, people are moving away from organized religion, moving away from the church, moving away from the mosque, moving away from the synagogue, for whatever reason, for various reasons. And you've heard me refer to throwing the baby out with the bathwater without really understanding the context in which our people had to survive. And so I don't accept that we wholesale accepted and bought into Christianity. How can you, with someone standing over you with the whip? How can you, when you are watching and hearing the cries and the sounds of your people being tortured and maimed for not towing the line, for not embracing? And it's more than just showing up at the church house when Master say go to church. This is how you act every day. This is what you sing every day. This is what you say and talk about every day. So we learn to shuck and jive, if you will, for survival. I don't embrace. My ancestors will not allow me to embrace. They speak to me, through me, around me, before me, and they resist the notion that they somehow just bowed down and accepted Christianity. And they resent the modern implication that they somehow did so. It's not black and white, they say. It's not as simple as who accepted and who didn't accept. That would be the case, that we would have had a much higher mortality rate. Many more of our men and women would have been executed for being subversive, for being subversive, for being radical, for going against the system. And we should empathize. We're still in that battle. We should empathize. Even today, people are still in a quandary about, do I twist my hair? Do I dread my hair now? Do I get cornrows and braids now? Do I wear an African outfit outside of the month of February? And do I put my job at risk, my lifestyle at risk? Do my church friends and family start questioning my beliefs? We've got to put things into context when we're trying to make sense of our ancestors' motivation for doing things. Songs were composed spontaneously, but they were also based on long-held belief, symbolism, ideas that would resonate, and so making it that much easier to hide the code. Many people told stories from Genesis to Revelation with God's faithful as the main characters. They knew about Adam and Eve in the garden, about Moses in the Red Sea. They sang of the Hebrew children and Joshua at the Battle of Mary, Jesus, God, and the devil. If you stood around long enough, you'd hear a song about the blind man seeing, God trouble in the water, Ezekiel seeing a wheel in the sky, Jesus being crucified and raised from the dead. If slaves couldn't read the Bible, they would memorize biblical stories that they heard repeated over and over again and transform songs. And they contained our code. They held secret messages. They held words that contained mysteries that those who were consciously aware, actively aware, understood to mean much more important things. Many spirituals sounded similar in melody to Protestant hymns and spoke of similar ideas, seeking salvation, peace in the kingdom of heaven, glorifying the Lord. But the tribal rhythms from their African tradition, however, transformed these usually quiet and sober hymns into with rhythm, with vigor. I can imagine the white man thinking how joyful and excited they are in accepting of our